Most people think power comes from speaking louder, arguing better, or dominating the conversation. But the real dominance begins when you stop talking. Imagine a man named Armin. He walks into a tense meeting where everyone is arguing. Voices are raised. Emotions are leaking everywhere. Instead of defending himself or trying to win the debate, Armin simply listens. When someone challenges him directly, he doesn't rush to respond. He holds eye contact and stays silent. That silence feels small to him, but enormous to everyone else. Here's what most people don't understand. The human brain is uncomfortable with silence. When there's a gap in conversation, the mind starts racing. Did I say something wrong? Is he judging me? Is he angry? The silence creates psychological pressure, and pressure makes people fill the space. Within seconds, the person who challenged Armin starts talking again. They explain more. They justify themselves. They soften their tone. Without realizing it, they're trying to win his approval. Armin didn't argue. He didn't attack. He didn't defend. He simply let silence do the work. Silence flips the power dynamic. The one who speaks first after tension subconsciously takes the weaker position. Why? Because they're reacting. The silent one appears emotionally controlled, calculated, and unshaken. In dark psychology, perceived emotional control equals perceived higher status, and higher status leads to unconscious obedience. Now imagine Armin in another situation. Someone insults him publicly, expecting a reaction. Instead of snapping back, he slowly looks at them, pauses, then calmly changes the subject. No anger, no explanation, just controlled indifference. The room shifts. People don't see weakness, they see restraint. And restraint feels dangerous. It signals that he chooses when to engage. That's the secret. Silence makes others project their fears onto you. When you don't reveal your thoughts, people fill the blanks with their own assumptions, and most of those assumptions exaggerate your power. They imagine you're calculating. They imagine you're confident. They imagine you're unfazed, all because you refuse to react. Silence also forces people to chase your validation. When you respond instantly to everything, your attention feels cheap. But when you pause, when you speak slowly and selectively, every word carries weight. People lean in, they listen harder, they subconsciously seek your reaction. The key is controlled silence, not awkward silence. Your body language must stay relaxed, your eye contact steady, your breathing slow. You're not silent because you're nervous. You're silent because you're choosing to observe. Armin understands something most people never learn. The person who controls the pace of the conversation controls the frame. And silence controls the pace. When others rush, he waits. When others push, he watches. And eventually, they adjust themselves to him. That's the dominance hack no one talks about. You don't need to overpower people. You just need to become comfortable with the tension they're trying to escape. Because the one who can sit calmly in silence becomes the one everyone unconsciously follows. Most people try to gain influence by being more available, more helpful, more responsive. They answer instantly. They agree quickly. They show up every time they're called. And without realizing it, they lower their perceived value. Now imagine the same man, Armin. But this time, he doesn't chase attention. He doesn't over-explain. He doesn't make himself constantly accessible. When someone messages him, he doesn't always reply immediately. Not to play games, but because his time isn't cheap. When people invite him somewhere, he doesn't automatically say yes. Sometimes he says, "I'll see." Sometimes he declines calmly. No excuses, no guilt, just controlled availability. And something strange begins to happen. The less available he becomes, the more people try to secure his presence. This is the Scarcity Authority Hack. Human psychology is wired to value what feels limited. When something is easy to access, the brain assumes it's common. When something feels scarce, the brain assigns it higher status. That's why luxury brands limit supply. That's why exclusive clubs have waiting lists. Scarcity creates perceived importance. Armin understands this deeply. He knows that attention is currency. If he gives it freely to everyone, it loses value. So he gives it selectively. When he listens fully, but not endlessly. When he compliments, he means it, but not excessively. When he approves, it feels earned. Over time, people begin adjusting their behavior around him. They try to impress him. They try to align with his standards. They speak more carefully. They seek his validation. And the power shift happens silently. Here's the dark truth. People don't obey the most generous person in the room. They obey the one whose approval feels rare. Scarcity signals status, and status creates unconscious compliance. Imagine Arman in a group discussion. Others are constantly trying to contribute, interrupting, proving their worth. Arman speaks less, but when he does, everyone listens. Why? Because his words are not frequent. They carry weight. The brain associates infrequency with importance. If he talks, it must matter. The same applies emotionally. Arman doesn't react to every drama. He doesn't show excitement for every small achievement. His emotional responses are measured. This makes his reactions powerful. When he finally smiles in approval or nods in agreement, it feels significant. It feels earned. And that's when people begin to follow him, not because he demanded authority, but because his presence feels valuable. The key is subtlety. Scarcity must feel natural, not manipulative. If you ignore people aggressively, it creates resentment. But if you simply prioritize yourself, your time, your focus, your standards, scarcity forms automatically. Arman never announces his value. He never says he's important. He doesn't need to. His limited availability speaks for him. And here's the final psychological trigger when people feel they might lose access to someone. Their attachment increases. The possibility of absence activates fear of loss. Fear of loss is stronger than desire for gain. That fear makes people comply, adjust, and invest more. So Arman doesn't chase. He doesn't beg. He doesn't overextend. He lets people come to him. And the less he needs their attention, the more they unconsciously seek his lead. Arman understood something most people never notice. People trust familiarity more than logic. You can have the strongest argument in the room, but if the other person doesn't feel connected to you, they will resist. So instead of trying to overpower others with force, Arman mastered something quieter: alignment. When he meets someone new, he doesn't immediately try to impress them. He observes. He watches how fast they speak, how they sit, how they move their hands. If they lean back casually, he leans back too. If they speak slowly and calmly, he matches their pace. If they're energetic, he slightly raises his energy, but never more than them. This is the emotional mirror hack. The human brain is wired to feel safe around similarity. When someone subtly mirrors our body language or tone, our subconscious registers them as familiar. Familiar feels safe, safe feels trustworthy, and trust lowers resistance. In a negotiation, Arman once faced a man who was aggressive and impatient. Instead of calming him down immediately, Arman first mirrored his intensity, his voice firm, his posture solid, his eye contact steady. Within minutes, the tension softened. The man unconsciously felt understood. Only then did Arman gradually slow his tone. He leaned back. He lowered his voice. And without realizing it, the other man followed. That's the hidden layer of this hack. You don't just mirror, you lead. First, you match their emotional state. Then, once connection is formed, you slowly shift the direction. The subconscious mind follows the person it feels aligned with. And if they feel you're similar, they won't even notice they're adjusting to you. Arman never copies, obviously. That would feel awkward. The mirroring is subtle. A slight delay in gestures, a similar rhythm in speech, matching breathing patterns. It's invisible but powerful. The brain loves patterns. When it detects a matching pattern in another person, it releases comfort signals. Comfort reduces critical thinking. Reduced critical thinking increases influence. Imagine someone telling Arman about their struggles. Instead of immediately offering advice, he matches their emotional tone. If they sound frustrated, he responds with grounded seriousness. If they speak softly, he lowers his voice too. The other person begins to feel deeply understood. He gets me, they think, and once that thought forms, their guard drops. That's when suggestions become easier to accept. The dangerous part of this technique is that it doesn't feel like control. It feels like connection, and people rarely resist connection. But here's what separates amateurs from masters. Arman never loses himself in the mirror. He uses it strategically. He steps into their emotional frame only long enough to build rapport. Then he gently reshapes the frame. If someone is anxious, he mirrors slightly, then becomes calm. If someone is overly excited, he matches briefly, then becomes composed. Slowly, the other person synchronizes with his state. The one who controls the emotional temperature controls the interaction. And because the shift feels natural, people believe the change was their own decision. They don't see influence. They see understanding. That's the power of the emotional mirror hack. You don't force obedience. You create alignment so deep that following you feels like their own idea. Arman learned early that direct commands create resistance. The moment you tell someone, do this, their ego wakes up. Even if they agree, a part of them wants to push back. It's human nature. People crave autonomy. They want to feel in control of their choices. So instead of ordering people around, Arman mastered something far more subtle. He made them believe the decision was theirs. One evening, a colleague doubted whether he could handle a difficult project. Instead of saying, "You should take it," Arman calmly shrugged and said, "It might be too complex. Not everyone can manage that kind of pressure." He didn't challenge him directly. He didn't insist. He simply planted a suggestion wrapped in doubt. Within seconds, the colleague straightened his posture. "No, I can handle it," he replied. And just like that, he volunteered himself. That's the reverse psychology trigger. When you tell someone they might not be capable, you activate their need to prove themselves. The ego hates being underestimated. It wants validation. It wants to defend its identity. So instead of resisting you, they resist the idea that they're weak. And in doing so, they move exactly where you wanted them to go. Arman never overused this tactic. He applied it strategically. If someone hesitated to make a bold move, he wouldn't push. He'd say, "It's fine if you'd rather play it safe." That sentence alone was enough. Playing it safe suddenly felt like weakness. The person would reconsider, not because Arman forced them, but because their pride couldn't tolerate the implication. The key is tone, calm, unemotional, slightly indifferent. If it sounds like manipulation, it fails. But if it feels like a casual observation, the mind accepts it as reality. Reverse psychology works because it bypasses conscious defense. Direct persuasion triggers skepticism, but subtle doubt triggers internal motivation. When people argue against you, they become more committed to their own stance. So Arman lets them argue themselves into action. He once dealt with someone stubborn who refused advice. Instead of insisting, Arman said, "You're probably not ready to see it that way yet." That sentence lingered. It wasn't an insult. It was a challenge to growth. Days later, the same person returned, acting as if the new idea had been their own realization. That's the beauty of it. When people think an idea is self-generated, they defend it passionately, and the strongest obedience is the one that feels self-chosen. But Arman understands balance. If used aggressively, reverse psychology can create resentment. The trick is subtle implication, not humiliation. You're not attacking their identity. You're gently questioning their limits. Human beings move fastest when trying to protect their ego. So instead of fighting their pride, Arman leverages it. Instead of pushing against resistance, he redirects it. He doesn't command. He suggests doubt. He doesn't demand. He implies exclusion. And when people step forward to prove themselves, they believe they acted freely. They don't see the invisible nudge that guided them there. That's the silent power of reverse psychology. The most effective control doesn't feel like control at all. It feels like choice. Arman noticed something most people miss. Emotional reactions are signals of weakness. The moment you react impulsively, you give the other person information. You show them what triggers you, what hurts you, what angers you. And once someone knows your triggers, they can control you. So Arman trained himself to remove the reaction. Not the emotion, just the reaction. One afternoon, someone tried to embarrass him in front of others. A sharp comment, a subtle insult. The room went quiet, waiting for tension. Most people would defend themselves instantly. But Arman didn't rush. He looked at the person calmly, expression neutral, almost unreadable. Then he shifted his gaze away as if the comment wasn't worth energy. No anger, no sarcasm, no forced smile, just emotional detachment. That moment did something powerful. The person who tried to provoke him suddenly felt exposed. When there's no reaction, the attacker receives no reward. And without reward, the behavior loses power. This is the cold detachment effect. Human beings unconsciously test for control. They poke, they tease, they challenge. They want to see where your emotional boundaries are. If you explode, they know you're reactive. If you defend aggressively, they know you're affected. But if you stay composed, truly composed, they feel uncertain. Uncertainty shifts the power dynamic. Arman's calmness created a psychological imbalance. The other person began questioning themselves. Did that not work? Did I misjudge him? Silence combined with emotional control sends a dangerous signal: unpredictability. And unpredictability commands caution. Over time, people stopped testing him. Not because he threatened them, but because they sensed he was unmovable. Detachment isn't coldness for the sake of ego. It's controlled emotional discipline. Arman still feels emotions internally. He simply chooses when and how to express them. He never allows others to dictate his state. In negotiations, this made him powerful. If someone tried to pressure him with urgency, he remained steady. If someone tried to intimidate him, his breathing stayed slow. When others showed frustration, he mirrored none of it. The calmer he became, the more agitated they grew. And the more agitated they grew, the weaker their position became. Emotional stillness creates psychological superiority. Why? Because humans naturally follow the strongest emotional state in the room. If someone panics and you remain calm, your nervous system becomes the anchor. Others subconsciously align with stability. Stability feels like leadership. Arman understood one brutal truth. The person who cares less emotionally often controls more strategically. When people sense you are not desperate for approval, not afraid of confrontation, not shaken by tension, they adjust themselves to keep access to you. Detachment removes leverage from others. It makes manipulation ineffective, and when people realize they cannot provoke you, they begin to respect you. Not because you demanded respect, but because your emotional independence feels rare. In a world where most people are reactive, the one who stays composed appears powerful. And that quiet power doesn't need to shout. It simply exists, steady, controlled, and impossible to move. Arman understood that people don't just act based on logic, they act based on identity. What someone believes about themselves quietly controls how they behave. So instead of trying to force behavior, Arman learned to shape identity. One day, he was working with someone who often hesitated under pressure. Instead of criticizing him or giving long motivational speeches, Arman simply said, "You're the type of person who handles intense situations better than most." He said it calmly, confidently, as if it were already a fact. The man paused for a second. Something shifted. That single sentence planted a label. This is the labeling hack. When you assign someone a positive identity, their subconscious mind feels pressure to act consistently with it. Humans crave internal consistency. If someone sees themselves as intelligent, they try to make smart decisions. If someone sees themselves as strong, they try not to appear weak. Identity drives behavior far more than instructions ever could. Arman never said, "Be confident." That feels like advice. Advice can be ignored. But when he says, You're naturally confident in tough rooms. Now it's no longer advice, it's a mirror. And people instinctively try to match the reflection they're given. The brain hates contradiction between identity and action. If someone is labeled as reliable, they will feel uncomfortable acting irresponsibly. If someone is labeled as disciplined, skipping effort feels like betrayal, not to you, but to themselves. That's the power. The control doesn't come from force. It comes from planting a self-image they feel compelled to protect. Armin once dealt with a stubborn negotiator who loved dominating conversations. Instead of confronting him, Armin said casually, "I respect how strategic you are. You don't rush decisions emotionally." From that moment on, the negotiator slowed down. He became more measured. Why? Because now he had an identity to live up to. The trick is subtle reinforcement. After labeling, Armin would occasionally nod and say, "That's exactly what I meant," whenever the person acted accordingly. That confirmation strengthens the identity loop. But this hack has a darker edge. Labels don't have to be extreme. Even small ones shape behavior. If you tell someone, "You're not the type who gives up easily," they'll push harder. If you say, "You're someone who values loyalty," they'll hesitate before betraying trust. You're not commanding them. You're defining them. And once a definition is accepted internally, behavior follows automatically. Armin is careful though. Labels must feel believable. If they're unrealistic, the brain rejects them. The key is attaching the label to something the person already slightly believes about themselves. Then amplify it. Identity is the deepest psychological lever. Control the identity, and you influence the actions without ever demanding obedience. People don't fight for orders. They fight for who they believe they are. And when you become the one shaping that belief, they begin aligning their behavior with the version of themselves you've quietly installed. Armin understood that people are addicted to approval. The moment someone gives praise or recognition instantly, it loses power. Everyone wants validation, but not everyone values it equally. If you hand it out freely, it becomes cheap. So instead of giving approval immediately, Armin learned to make it feel earned. When a colleague completed a difficult task, instead of saying, "Great job," right away, he waited a few moments. He observed carefully, nodding subtly, letting the tension of anticipation build. Then, with calm authority, he said, "Exactly the precision I expected from you." The words were simple, but the timing made them powerful. This is the controlled approval technique. Human brains are wired to associate rewards with scarcity. When approval is delayed, it becomes a psychological reward, not just a comment. Dopamine spikes. People crave it. They start to unconsciously modify behavior to earn more of it. They seek your validation without even realizing it. Armin used this in meetings. When someone suggested an idea aligned with his goals, he didn't praise it immediately. Instead, he listened carefully, waited, and only acknowledged it selectively. The result: people began presenting their best ideas, anticipating that only the strongest efforts would get his approval. The quality of behavior improved, guided entirely by the subtle psychology of reward. The trick is consistency. If approval is given too often, it loses impact. If withheld entirely, people become frustrated. The key is measured, strategic, and calm acknowledgement. This creates an invisible hierarchy where people naturally want to align with your standards. Even small gestures work. A smile, a nod, a calm, "Well done," timed perfectly, sends a message. "I notice, I value it, not everyone earns this." That feeling is addictive. People unconsciously start competing to earn your recognition, following your lead without you ever demanding it. Armin understood that true influence isn't loud, it's subtle. It's not forcing compliance but shaping desire. And when people start seeking your approval, they begin obeying your silent lead, adjusting their behavior to fit the standard you set. Controlled approval is invisible control. People don't realize they're being guided. They only feel the reward of recognition, and naturally, they follow the path that keeps giving it. This is the final dark psychology hack. Make validation scarce, make it valuable, and watch people align with you unconsciously.